when it comes to Greek, two of the most important features of the verb system are tense and aspect. These are really important when it comes to exegeting text for a sermon, or also for discussing text or translation of text. These two features, the tense and the aspect, are both related, but they are different and they have different functions when it comes to our understanding of what's going on in the Greek. Tense is simply when something happens. And we might understand this a lot easier, I guess, than aspect when approaching grammar for someone who doesn't really understand grammar all that well. We know that things can happen in the future, they can happen now, or they can happen in the past. And these are communicated through Greek verbs to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the tense form. Then we have the aspect, which is the way a author or speaker wishes to communicate about an action. And we'll get more into that in a second. And then we have tense forms, though, and these are the way the Greek language codifies these features into the language, and they exist in the form of endings or prefixes on a Greek verb. So the tense forms are what we see in the Greek language, and they're basically sets of endings that codify to a greater or lesser extent tenses and aspects. Now, there are a lot of conflicts in the Greek grammarian world about how many aspects there might be, and whether or not each of the tense forms actually carries a tense with it. So let's start off by talking a bit more about aspect, and then we'll dive into a bit of the tense forms. So with aspect, depending on who you talk to, there are 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 aspects. So with the Greek textbook that I've been using at the moment, Black tends to refer to 3 aspects. So he has the aoristic, the imperfective, and the perfective aspect. The aoristic aspect is regards to a verbal aspect that is essentially the basic statement of fact. The intent of using the aoristic aspect, according to Black, is to essentially state that something happened. So the action is looked at from a bird's eye view. It's essentially the whole verb is communicated. So, for example, I studied the book. It's a statement of fact that I studied would be in the aoristic aspect, according to Black. Then you have the imperfective aspect, which is more when you're discussing something that's happened, but you want to discuss the way it's happened or how it happened. And so you might say, I was studying the book. So then you start talking about how or why that was happening. And then Black's third aspect is the perfective aspect, which he discusses as meaning is the way you communicate about when something's happened, the results of that thing happening. So you might talk about how I had studied the book, so I was able to know a bit more about Greek. Now, these aren't hard and fast rules. Campbell, another grammarian who's written quite a complex and good book on the topic, tends to refer to just the imperfective and the perfective, and he talks more. He kind of blends the aoristic into the perfective aspects. Now, the tense forms themselves, some of them are very clearly associated with certain aspects or certain tenses. So, going by Black's formula, the present tense and the aorist tense are both aoristic in nature, for example. And they communicate the specific action in its entirety from a bird's eye view. So I study the book, just tells you about the action in its being. It's a very basic approach to the topic. Or I studied the book, for example. Whereas the future tense doesn't seem to communicate an aspect as well. It communicates more of a tense. So the future tense is always future. Now, it's quite a complex system with lots of different rules, but essentially aspect is the way the author or speaker wants to talk about an action, and tense is when it happened. And with Greek's inflected language, this can be communicated through the various tenses.